Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Petina Gappah, Zimbabwe's celebrated and award-winning author, who is also an international trade lawyer. Is that what then led you to accept the appointment in December 2017 to July 2018 to be the external consultant advisor on trade and investment law and policy in the office of the President and Cabinet?
Yes, yes and no. It was honestly the most accidental thing to have happened. November 2017 happened. There was that transition, there was all that optimism, there was hope. And naturally, I was one of the really hopeful and optimistic people. I come home for Christmas. This is now December 2017. And now Ambassador Katsande, he was Colonel Katsande then, who was Deputy Chief at OPC, learns that I'm in Zimbabwe. And what people don't know is that I have always worked with government in an informal capacity with all our ambassadors in Geneva, giving advice, sometimes informal, sometimes formally through the African group, who were one of my biggest clients when I worked in Geneva. So I've always given advice on trade, law and policy in one way or the other. So Ambassador Katsande learns that I'm in town. He asks if I can do a concept paper to help them guide the participation of the president at Davos. So I, stay up all night to do a concept paper, what I think the message should be, and how to best take advantage of this incredible opportunity to announce a new investment policy. He reads it the next morning and he says, "Would you like to come and assist us?" And so that's how it began,
Wow.
As accidentally as that. And the one condition that I had was that it was not right for the president to go out to the world and talk about a new investment policy before consulting Zimbabweans who are in business. So I said the first thing that we need to do is to have an investment conference in Zimbabwe. And so we did that. We had about 200 people. It was extremely well received. And then we realized that the three women that we had asked to speak on the different panels were unable to come. And it was looking increasingly embarrassing to have all these men on the panels. And then Ambassador Katsande said, "You should say something." So I was actually the last speaker with Lance Mambondiani. And I looked around the room. There were 200 people in business. There was the president, the two vice presidents, half the cabinet. And I thought, here's my opportunity to say something that I've always wanted to say. So I tore into government policy on communications, on policy inconsistencies. And I thought people would be extremely uncomfortable. But actually, that's the thing that made them want to work with me.
Wow.
And I understand that the president afterwards said she needs to actually come to Davos and not just do the concept paper. So that's how I ended up purely accidentally working for OPC.
What were the highlights in OPC for you?
It's something I always knew because, as I say, I was sort of on the periphery of government for a very long time. But there are some very impressive people in government, in the civil service. Some incredibly impressive people on the individual level, but the system lets them down. We have a systemically dysfunctional government, right? The most frustrating thing is that every decision is a collective decision. So it's meeting after meeting after meeting. Trevor, there is no bigger waste of time than meetings.
The meetings, I hate meetings.
Exactly. You don't do anything in meetings, you don't achieve anything. So that's one thing. Another dysfunctional area is communications, whether it's internal communications or external communications. Let me just talk about internal communications. You have things like there are no templates for anything, really. So a letter will look different depending on who's typed it up. The fonts will look different depending on who's typed it up. And it seems like such a small thing, but it's all part of presenting a picture of an organization that's functioning. And then, of course, the internal communication within ministries and even within departments is not always what it should be. And then, of course, there's the external communications, which is, I believe, really absolutely a disaster. And it's no secret that I had many arguments with some otherwise very good and competent people in government on the use of propaganda, for instance. I don't think the use of propaganda is particularly helpful in a time where you have social media, where every person is potentially a journalist. You know, you cannot manipulate messages in the same way that you could when you were controlling the one and only permanent television station.
You know, on that point, I don't know what you think about this. I think there's a difference between lies and propaganda. Propaganda is sophisticated manipulation of information. Lies is just you are lying to people thinking that is propaganda. What's your response to that?
I don't like propaganda
at all.
I don't like manipulation of information at all. I like an approach that is called strategic communications, which is you tell the truth about your situation. And if your situation is bad, you apologize for it. You explain it, but you don't lie about it. You don't manipulate it, you know? So if something terrible happens, right, you don't try to cover it up. You simply confront it and explain it, and if necessary, apologize for it. We saw the government of Zimbabwe at its best during Cyclone Idai, right? The message was clear. What needed to be done was clear. The communications were clear. Where is that government all the other times? That's what I would like to know, you know, because I think that it is an absolute mistake for the government to continue to act as though ZBC is where people get their information. It's not.
Perhaps communication, from my vantage point, is one of the biggest weaknesses of the current administration. What's your view?
Look, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this question, what's gone wrong, what's going wrong. Communication is just a symptom, I think. It's a symptom of something that's fundamentally not right. And I think I've got an idea of what it is that's gone wrong. And I know people will disagree, and I'm sure that this section of this interview will be much talked over and maybe even generate what Mutuli called exciting headlines and so on. But I think what fundamentally went wrong was that this was a very quick transition, right? So currently the government is not on a strong ideological footing. They're trying to find their way. They're trying to find out who they are as a government, you know. And everything that they have planned and that they've agreed on, whether it's Vision 2030 or this, it's all patched on, right? And it's coming top down without any real buy-in from everyone. I actually learned with something of a shock that there apparently hasn't been any cabinet retreat or of any kind, you know. If, for instance, you know, my field is investment and trade. If, for instance, your new policy, your new ideological thrust is to open up your country to investment, right? You have to understand that you can't be open for business without also being an open society. It's not possible. You cannot be open for business and you have police beating people on the streets. Because those messages, whether you like it or not, will be linked to your open for business approach. And people will be asking, what country is open for business that projects itself as a place where people can be thumped and beaten?
Why is that happening? Why the contradiction? We open for business, but you're not an open society. You're beating up people and so forth. Explain that to us. Why is that happening? Why is that serious contradiction between what government says, what the president says, and what happens on the ground?
That's exactly what I was saying earlier, that I think there's a misunderstanding that this new ideological thrust has to come with some pain and some sacrifices, right? So, and it has to come with real change, right? Real change in terms of the way we were doing things in the past, right? So if you want to be open for business, genuinely, Trevor, you have to be an open society, which means you cannot have police brutality, right? You cannot have soldiers shooting people in broad daylight, right? And to me, this seems so obvious, but I think there's a disconnect in government and a failure to understand that what you do domestically has a real impact on what you do in terms of your foreign policy. Everything is connected. So this idea, this separation of This is foreign policy. This is, a home affairs business. This is, it doesn't work anymore.
What if the president believes in open for business and there are certain people in certain areas of his administration that don't believe in open for business? The people that then are behind the shooting and the beating up of people and so forth. Are they entrenched interests deliberately out to frustrate the president? What's your reading?
I wouldn't say that they are entrenched interests out to frustrate. I would say that as with any system that is trying to change, there will always be vested interests. There will always be people who are fearful of change for perhaps ideological reasons. Maybe there are people who genuinely believe we are better off with the Chinese or the Russians. We don't want to open up to the West. So that's an ideological disagreement right there. Then there are some people who might fear change for very basic material reasons. They might lose their jobs. You also have to factor in those concerns as well. But ultimately, Trevor, the buck stops at the top.
Yeah.
The buck stops at the top. So the president needs to understand what change looks like. And I think my fear and my disappointment is that I don't think it's always clear what change looks like. And I will go even further and say, it is not possible to have change without change agents, right? And if you yourself are not a change agent and you've been part of the system, then the very least you can do is to bring in fresh blood, to be surrounded by fresh energy, right? I've had disagreements with our friend Shingimnyeza on this issue of female participation and women's participation, for instance. But one of the things that really propelled Rwanda forward was bringing in women into government, right? We haven't done that in nearly enough numbers in Zimbabwe. We haven't brought in young people into government. And for as long as you have the same men with respect who have failed, you are really not going to have as much change as you want.
That's worrying in terms of where we're going right now and in terms of where we are as a country and President Mnangagwa's administration.
I'm not worried. I'm worried for the immediate, I'm worried about today, I'm worried about tomorrow. Coming here to Granite Side, Trevor, I passed through one of my favorite parts of Harare, which is Siaso, the Siaso market, which I think really shows Zimbabweans at their enterprising best, their resilience, the creativity. And I've been trying to get the Minister of Finance to visit Siaso, right? What I would really love is for even the president himself, ditch the motorcade, go incognito in a single car, drive around Harare, see what the city is in which you live, drive around the country, get to see how people live, And this is important, Trevor, because we were talking earlier about poor communications,
Sure.
but it's not just about poor communications or inconsistent communications. It's a basic lack of empathy, just a basic compassion, just the way government officials talk to people and about people. It just shows that there's a basic lack of caring, and to me that's disappointing.
And that's an important point that you raise about CSO, but I can see the people around the president immediately saying, no, it's a security risk, you shouldn't do that. And those are some of the entrenched interests, the old thinking that is not going to transform us into a new society.
I obviously can't breach confidentiality in terms of, I can't talk about, in great detail about what I saw and what I experienced. But this one is a fairly open secret because people see it all the time. But one of the things that protocol does is to prevent the president from connecting to people. Whereas protocol should facilitate connection, not prevent connection. Zimbabwe, Trevor, at all these international summits, we're an embarrassment.
Sure. We're
an embarrassment because we always have the largest delegation. We always have the most male-heavy delegation. No women travel, really. We always have this presence, lots of men in dark suits, people, we almost feel like we're Zimbabwe, we have to be felt. And yet, when you see other presidents, when you see other leaders arriving at these summits, President Kagame comes to Davos with maybe 2 security personnel, right? And he walks and he meets people and is perfectly friendly. Our president You've met him. He's a very warm and friendly person. You know, he likes talking and engaging with people. But I do worry that his protocol, which is meant to, you know, enhance the office of the president, actually, you know, makes him remote and distant from the people.
Why?
I think it's the Mugabe big man syndrome. Look, we were talking earlier about imagination, and imagination is very important. Trevor, we have to imagine a different kind of presidency. The president himself has to imagine a different kind of presidency. He can't walk lockstep in the same path that President Mugabe was walking. He has to imagine, what does a Mnangagwa presidency look like? It can't be a pale imitation of a Mugabe presidency. In part because he is not President Mugabe and he can't be President Mugabe. So he has to find his own style and his own way. And one thing that I hoped to see was to find a president who's more willing to connect with people. And we saw that a little bit during the election campaign when he was meeting these different groups. Where is that president and where is that midterm review? You know, I'm very critical of many aspects of, you know, American democracy, but one thing I really admire is this idea of midterm elections. 2 years after you've elected a president, you go to the country and you ask them to choose representatives for Congress and Senate. And that is sort of like a referendum on, you know, on how the president is doing. And we don't have that system, obviously, but 2 years, you know, 1 year after the election, why isn't the president reconnecting with those same people that he asked to vote for him?
I'll ask you the question. I'll throw it back at you. Why?
Why? I think it's precisely that question, that people genuinely don't understand what change looks like. They don't recognize change when it comes to them.
Wow. Then you resigned, and as an advisor from that position.
I didn't resign.
And they were resigned, and there were headlines and that kind of stuff. We go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. What happened? What was the story?
No, I didn't resign. My contract ended in July. And remember what I told you, that I sort of like came in on an ad hoc, in an ad hoc capacity for Davos. And then I did another summit in Abidjan, the Africa CEO Forum. And then I did a visit for the foreign minister to London. He was meeting with investors and so on. And then I did something else. I think I did 4 different events. And I was living in Germany at the time, finishing my book, right? And while all of this was happening, my book was being sold around the world. And I had the publication deadline, right? And there was a gap of 1 year, right, between the book being submitted and the book being published.
Sure.
And I thought, maybe this is 1 year I can move to Zim and try and help to set up ZIDA, which is, you know, my big passion project. And I was very excited to hear that the president wanted to set up a version of the Rwanda Development Board. So I thought maybe this is something I can help with. So I signed a contract for 1 year. I really wish I'd brought it to show you. But I signed a contract for 1 year, knowing that in August, I would have to, you know, go back to my book promotion work. And I'm also doing a fairly major dispute, which again, I can't talk about in the WTO. I'm arbitrating a fairly large trade dispute. So I knew that my life from July 2019 would get extremely busy. So it was always planned that I would spend that 1 year doing this, and then I would move on to the next thing.
So the contract ended and you moved on. Looking back, do you have any regrets of having worked in OPC?
Look, I have no regrets about working for the government. But I wish I hadn't been based in OPC.
Why? Why?
No, because my real love is foreign affairs, is multilateral issues. It's I think I would have been a better fit either in foreign affairs or in finance. That would have been, I think, a better fit for me. And also OPC is a very difficult place to work in because it... again, this is an open secret. It tends to be the dumping ground for people who are simply parked there for whatever reasons. And if I ask you how many people are in OPC, I'm sure you can tell me now because you had that fantastic interview with Vincent Ongwe. But when I first heard of OPC, I thought, oh, maybe 50, 60 people at the most. I was really shocked to learn that there are actually 510 people. Of which I think there are more permanent secretaries in that one department than in the whole of government. And that already shows you the kind of organization that it is. So precisely because the ZIDA project was in OPC, we didn't succeed as quickly as we could have done had it been in another of the line ministries.
And it's still not happened.
It's still not happened. We sent, I sacrificed Christmas of 2018 to draft a really, a wonderful, bill, and we got a lot of support from the World Bank. They sent us Andrew Thorburn. You cannot find a better consultant, Trevor, because he's the man who helped set up the Rwanda Development Board. They sent us this man to assist us. And we wrote the law together, we did a number of policies, and still nothing has been done. And in fact, the ZEDA bill was fought over by different departments in government, watered down, sent to Parliament, and still wasn't passed. So it really is of great disappointment to me that we are still going around the world promoting investment when we don't have the enabling legislation that we promised in January 2018, 2 years ago.
Why is this not happening? I keep on asking.
You are probably better placed than I am.
Fortunately, I'm asking the questions today.
Look, I mean, I just to give you an example of ZEDA, right? So the man responsible for making sure that ZEDA is set up is a very, very nice bureaucrat whose specialization is education, right? Very competent in his field of education, but maybe not the most ideal person to push an investment strategy, or to push the agenda for an investment body. So it's a question of sometimes square pegs and round holes, right? We have the right people, but we're not putting them in the right capacities. We're not utilizing their competencies in the way that we could. So that's just one example.
Would you answer the call again if they said, Petina, come and help?
Well, after the storm that was created, when I went in, I mean, that's certainly something that I regret, by the way I handled some of that criticism. Some of it I took too personally when a lot of it was not personally intended. But would I answer the call, right? It would very much depend on the circumstances. If I had the authority and the autonomy to actually make decisions, and if I could have the kind of relationship with the president and some of the ministers that I enjoyed, which is where I was actually frank to the point of sometimes being accused of being overly blunt or kureruka. If I could have that relationship where I could speak my mind and be listened to, then yes, I probably would come back in a capacity that I felt utilized my competencies.
I can't see you working in an environment where you are not able to speak up your mind. That would suffocate you.
No, it would be extremely difficult. It would be extremely difficult. And Trevor, you sort of like did a short précis of my career. I've never worked in the private sector. It was only for about 3-4 months when I was at Kanter Immerman as a young lawyer before I went abroad. I've never worked in the private. Public service has always been my calling. So nothing would give me greater pleasure than to serve my country in a proper capacity, but it would have to be the right one. And no, Trevor, I'm not campaigning for a job.
Well, it's clear out there. You are on Twitter as I'm on Twitter. Our conversations have become very toxic. Our conversations have become very polarized. We talk across purposes. We don't listen to each other. We're abusive and so forth. What's your reading of that and your own role in that?
Look, I mean, I have been on Twitter for a number of years, but it's a platform I've always been ambivalent about. Partly, I think it's a function of age. I'm just so used to Facebook, where you can have longer posts and then there's the back and forth. So I found it very difficult to acclimatize to Twitter because I just found it really abrupt, unnecessarily rude, and because you have so few words to make a point. And even if you respond to someone, they can actually just take out your tweet and separate it from everything else. So it's a very disorienting experience. That said, I think what we see on Twitter is a reflection of our society. Trevor, people are angry. People are hurt. People are disappointed, and with good reason. Zimbabwe is very tough right now. And I think what really makes the disappointment so much more acute in 2019 than it was, say, in 2016 or 2017 is that we were told that we were fellow shareholders of this thing, right? People marched, in November 2017. People felt invested in the outcome. And then to be told, it's just a ZANU-PF, it was just a ZANU-PF internal thing. No, no. People are extremely disappointed and people feel like that they were used, right? And we had this incredible election, right? The run-up to the actual voting was really one of the most vibrant few months that Zimbabwe has witnessed. Contestation of ideas, promises were made. Do you remember that pledge?
Yeah.
The pledge card?
Yes.
It says, keep this pledge. And if I'm not fulfilling my promises, ask me. So people are asking, why aren't those promises being fulfilled? So people are naturally angry, people are bitter. And the other thing that I think has contributed to the polarization and the toxicity is that I feel very strongly that the president was not magnanimous in his victory. I feel he had an opportunity to unite not only his party, but also the country. I'm not a member of ZANU-PF, and in fact, that's one of the first things I told him when I said I would come and do this. But my reading of what's happening in ZANU-PF is it's a very fractured party. And he could have reached out to his enemies and said, look, we can work together. But that didn't happen. And he could also do more to reach out to the opposition, just as they could reach out as well to say, let's work together.
And that hasn't happened.
So I think there's that magnanimity that's missing in our politics, And as a result, people are very angry and very bitter. And there is obviously going to be a lot of sabotage in such a situation.
Are you hopeful?
Oh, yes.
Why?
Because I've always been hopeful. Even I think Zimbabwe, in my memory anyway, I was a child in the 1980s, but the lowest point for Zimbabwe in my memory was 2008, after that dreadful election. But I was still very hopeful and still very optimistic. I'm hopeful because this is the only Zimbabwe we have.
Absolutely.
There is no other. So if we don't fix it, who is going to? I have only the one passport, Trevor. My son only has the one passport. And his dream is to play cricket one day for Zimbabwe. And I really want that dream to come true for him.
Do you think that, you say the buck stops somewhere, it stops with the president. Can this administration self-correct?
I believe it can.
What would it take?
But it will not be easy. It will take a real understanding. I keep saying the same thing, Trevor, but it will take a real understanding of actually, what does change look like? What does transformation look like? And it's important to look outside our borders. Look at how other African countries have achieved change. Countries like Rwanda is a perfect example. Mauritius, I was just in Mauritius, and I'm so impressed by what they've done in terms of the economic development, how they've attracted investment. Look to Latin America. Look to Asian countries. Look to Singapore. There are so many models. Look to Eastern Europe. There are so many models, but it's going to take a real effort, and it's also going to take a lot of sacrifice. Because it might mean, for instance, sacrificing someone who's important for the party, but who's not delivering in terms of, being a government, employee or a government minister. So it's going to take a lot of those sacrifices. But Trevor, if there's no self-correction, then the next 5-6 years are going to look very bleak indeed.
Wow. I think I'm going to ask you, what are you reading now?
I've just done this amazing project, which was to judge the UK's most prestigious award for non-fiction. We gave £50,000 just 2 weeks ago to the winner. And so in the last few months, I've been reading mainly non-fiction that was published in the UK in the last year. And there's a book that I really want to recommend to everybody because ZANU-PF features quite prominently in it. It was a book that we shortlisted, and it's by a professor of history and economics at the London School of Economics called Julia Lovell, and it's a biography of Maoism. Maoism as an ideology, how it took root across different parts of the world, Cuba, Zimbabwe, why it succeeded in Zimbabwe and not in Ghana, and so on. And I think it's a really terrific book. So I would recommend that book. Our beloved national treasure, Cecilia Ngarembwa, also has a new book. It's the third in the series of the Nervous Conditions trilogy. It's called This Mournable Body. I would recommend that very highly as well. Gosh, I had a whole list of books that I wanted to recommend, but I'm still thinking about some of your questions and whether they're going to generate headlines.
And are you writing any book? Are you scribbling something?
Yes, I am writing book number 5 and book number 6 at the same time, because it's a trilogy. It's three books about the same family, and it's set in Rhodesia. And at some point, I'm going to go back and tell their story over 400 years, because they're somehow connected to the Mutapa Empire.
Wow.
So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And I'm also writing 2 plays.
Do you get time to relax, Petina, and how do you relax?
I'm a workaholic, so I don't like not having a project, but I enjoy swimming. I love swimming. I enjoy yoga. I like to play tennis, especially against my son, particularly when he was little. Then I could beat him. You know, I think defeat is good for the soul if you're young. I also, obviously, I read a lot. I travel a great deal, and I love talking to people. I will talk to anyone on any subject.
Petina, you are an absolute national treasure.
Thank you so much.
I love your wit. I love your candidness, your sharp brain, razor sharp brain, and I can see more books coming out of you.
Oh, thank you so much.
So we wish you all the best with the books that are yet to come, and your continued work to inspire people to read. So thank you so much. For you at home, in Zimbabwe, on the continent, and in the diaspora, we thank you for watching In Conversation with Trevor. Remember, In Conversation with Trevor is a weekly show, and we invite you to go onto our YouTube channel, and there's a red subscribe button. Please press on that so that you don't miss out on these exciting conversations that we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.